Hello, AG here. I know it's been a while, but this next subject took a lot longer to pull myself together with any kind of accuracy in between life stuff raising its ugly head. I decided to punish myself by diving into the genealogies within the gods, goddesses, Jotnar, etc. of the mythology. And in trying to make sense of them, I nearly threw my whiteboard into oncoming traffic multiple times. In researching this, I reviewed the usual sources, and every time I thought I had the details nailed down, I would find some random, obscure detail that raised questions that I then had to try and wrangle into answers before presenting. Well, I finally came up with a chart I can somewhat navigate and doesn't make me want to gouge my own eyeballs out too much. I, of course, reserve the right to change my mind and go a different direction later as more data is gathered. That's one of the beauties of the fluidity of mythology. At the top of this whiteboard is the cosmic energy of the universe. And below that, I have it separated out into 4 different categories so far. And I'm reasonably comfortable with using them. And these lines are going to include the one for Ymir, the line for Idumla, which admittedly will eventually join into Ymir's line, the Norns, and beings that I refer to as elementals. Now, the Norns do not really have any subsets to them. Ymir's line was briefly discussed in the previous podcasts, but we will expound more upon them at a later date. Idumla herself was covered, and since she does merge into Ymir's line, we may not need to revisit it once we dive into Ymir's line. But today, let us attempt to establish the other 2 groups and/or categories of beings mentioned in the lore. This multi-layered path will also take us down the loop-de-loop rides of basic genealogies. See why it took me so long? For now, I am only going to go over named individuals in the main texts. I may have missed some minor characters, but we can go over those when the stories are covered. And here is my disclaimer. There will be my own private UPG interjected on some of these family lines. And I'll do my best to warn you ahead of time, but if I miss one, please don't hold it against me. Just remember that I am interjecting my own opinions in here. Now, since it's been a while, let's do a fast recap to get our ears and heads into the subject. When last we were together, we went over elements of the creation myth, incorporating source material plus extra ideas to encourage looking at the stories from different angles. And to summarize, the cosmos was in the middle of nothing. From that nothing, Gununga Gap was created, a great yawning gap with a spark of cosmos nestled within. With that spark, we covered the creations of Muspelheim, Niflheim, Ymir, and Idumla. But is that all we have to work with when building this cosmology? I don't think so. There are several entities within the existing lore that have no real defined origins explained in any of the extant materials, such as the Eddas, Saxos Grammaticus, or Heimskringla. So let's go back to the beginning again and approach this from a different direction in the hopes of finding a plausible way to do that ourselves. It is not the end-all description. This is just a way to look at it. The universe is a mass of cosmic energy that ebbs and flows, ever expanding and then contracting. It's a rhythm, a heartbeat that throws out energy with every pulse. And around that pulsing energy, a chasm ended up forming, Gununga Gap. We then have that same cosmic energy throwing off power, creating things willy-nilly, and so begins the fires of Muspelheim and the ice shards of Niflheim. Idumla appears, Ymir forms, and still energy is coalescing into yet more life. And what about that life? The cosmos didn't suddenly go still with the start of Ymir and Idumla. It didn't cease throwing out energy. No. Science tells us that the universe or cosmos is made up of vast quantities of energy, and that energy is all around us, constantly shifting and changing. So what else did that energy create in the beginning? Well, like I said, on my whiteboard are the 4 categories that made the most sense in my studies. And you may not agree with how I've grouped it, but hear me out, and I will try to explain as we go. We have Idumla's line with it originating as she licked the salty rind. We have the section beginning with Gunungagap. Why? This line starts with the yawning gap because it was created rather than already existing. It is from the gap that Muspelheim and Niflheim begin. So in a way, it's creating its own realms. And then they come together forming Ymir. This is very much the primordial line, which stands on its own. Making Gunungagap a different division is appropriate when you view it in this light. Then there is a nebulous category of beings, or entities, or life forms, depending upon how you want to label them, that appear from apparently nowhere. The Norns with a capital N are one such group. They are made up of 3 women by the names of Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld. A note within Voluspa includes the information that they were at the beginning of things and saw how all things were created, including the seed of Yggdrasil, which we'll go over Yggdrasil in another podcast. It could wind up as a whole 5th category. This is why I have them ranked as one of the original lines when the cosmos began to form. Their connection to the beginning would match up with the initial Big Bang that kicked things off around Gunungagap. No mention is made of their lineage, though, neither parental nor descendants. If it ever existed, it is currently lost, and may be lost forever. But considering their roles, it would make sense for them to start alongside the other main groups, as they are purported to know the weird and orlog of all things. 2 more concepts which will have to be a later posting. Sorry. There isn't a great deal written about them specifically. However, since Snorri mentions them at all, they must have held a significant role in the lives of early Nordic peoples. And do not confuse these ladies with the more well-known Greek fates. They are not the same, even though they do have some similarities. On a side note, within the lore in Icelandic sagas, there are women that are hinted at becoming Norns, with a lowercase n. Those Norns are often defined as the Disir, or our female ancestors, but we don't have real clear explanations on how they come into being. So they are their own category all by themselves. I don't quite know how to categorize them just yet, but picture the chart in your mind. I have the big Norns ranked as their own division on the same level as Idumla and Gunungagap, and that gives us 3 of the 4 sections. The 4th group, which I'm going to go into detail now, is what I'm calling the elementals. These would be the personified forces of nature that are not quite primordial, like Ymir or Idumla. Rather, the beings responsible for both the controlled and wild energies of nature, often anthropomorphized. The elementals have their own subcategories, which I further separated into 3 distinct groups: elves or alves, vanir, and the line of Farbati that may or may not have been created by a hurricane of some sort. That is, hurricane with a capital H. Let's start with the elves. We don't know where the elves, spelled either with an E or an A, actually come from, which is why I've lumped them here under the elemental division. Cousins to the primal, feral, destructive forces, but also to the more ordered powers of creation, the Vanir. Going through the various texts, I've broken it down to 3 different types of elves: Dogalfar, or the dark elves, Ljótafar, or the light elves, and Svartafar, or the black elves. Do not confuse the terms dark and black by making them synonymous. The word svart is one of the identifiers for the color black in Old Norse or Icelandic. Dök references dark, but not the specific color. They are not the same thing when reading the texts. Dark elves can range anywhere from a lovely cream color to a charcoal. It can go anywhere in that range. So why are they called dark elves? Well, I'm about to explain that. I set them apart in this manner because the dark elves would be similar to mound dwellers, your earth elves. At least that's how I see them. They are the ones that prefer to live underground, but are still mostly tied to Midgard. And I say that because there's no mention of a realm or land specifically dedicated to the Daggelfar. Not a lot is really mentioned about them at all, just that they exist. I interpret that to fit perfectly with being mound dwellers. They like their privacy, to keep to themselves. This may also be the race of elves that hold sprites and tomten, brownies, nissa, and other spirits similar to the regular cast of the Fey race, but not necessarily your upper caste that includes Oberon and Titania. The Ljótafar, or your light elves, dwell within the top two heavens of the cosmology according to the Prose Edda. They are light of skin, pale, pasty, and they kind of glow. Think Galadriel from the Elves of Lothlorien tribe in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or the upper levels of the Fey hierarchy where Oberon, Anya, the Sidhe, and Titania reside. They are slightly above and beyond the other races, but still have a somewhat humanoid form. Their realm is called Jotunheim, land of the light elves. Now finally, there are the Svartalfar, your black elves. Now they are going to be the opposite of your light elves. They will be the ones that are dark of skin, ranging from dark gray to the dark black of a crayon. Marvel got that right, at least, in the Thor movie. They have their own realm, which I think is in balance with their light counterparts, called Svartalfheim, land of the Black Elves, or home of the Black Elves. They dwell in that darkness and, quite frankly, prefer it. Marvel did a good job showing the world of Svartalfheim in the movie, with perpetual twilight as their light source. I like to picture the things that bloom there would be your bioluminescence flora, mosses, and fungus that dwell within caves in the deepest, darkest caverns underground. I don't view it as a wasteland, just that the things that grow there thrive in twilight. They thrive in the dark versus in the light. So don't imagine a lack of light, but a type of light very different than other realms. Within the realm of Svartalfheim is another place that's been carved out called Nidavellir. This carved out region is the home of the dwarves. Dwarves are not the same thing as black elves. The dwarves were made from Ymir's guts, but the dark elves were written as the counter to your light elves, two sides of the same coin. Their realms are separate worlds, while the dwarves dwell within one of those worlds. Make sense? Now that we've established the three races of elves and where they are located, we can move on to review the two that are listed specifically by name within the text found thus far. We do not have any other references, nor any myths definitively associated to them, at least in their capacity as elves. The first mentioned is Ivaldi. There is a quick blurb about him stating he had many sons, but the names of those sons were not cataloged. He also had a daughter, the only other elf specifically mentioned by name, Iduna. She dwells among the Aesir and is married to one named Bragi. And while she does have her own story, it doesn't pertain to her as an elf, but rather as the wife of Bragi, a member of the Aesir. So that's pretty much it for the elves. Not a lot out there, but they are specifically mentioned and outlined in the lore, so we do need to mention them. The next subcategory under elementals will be the fierce forces of nature with a capital N. How I lay out this line is going to pull from Victor Rydberg's Investigations into Germanic Mythology, Volume 2. I know that it's a mixed bag when bringing up his material. I'm not here to debate whether his arguments are the end-all explanation of the cosmology and how it's grouped. There are some good points and some bad points to his work, just like any other author. Some of his material inspired my genealogical ideas and I ran with it, while other parts made me scrunch up my nose and say, "What the? Bear with me, and I will explain." Rydberg talks in volume 2 of his work about a supernatural line descending from a being or force called hurricane with a capital H. Now, in the 21st century, this name brings to mind the hurricanes occurring in the Atlantic Ocean, where we've got turbulent water, cape, convection, high temperatures, and all the other weather-based things churning in. The waters under these circumstances create massive storms of rain, hail, lightning, wind in excess of 100 miles per hour, tornadoes and waterspouts, and a whole host of other crazy precipitation phenomenon that cross the ocean, sometimes hit land, and then devastate everything in their path. Well, take that definition, that concept, and crank it up to 111. That type of power is the primal, elemental, chaotic force of Rydberg's hurricane. Now, as far as I'm aware, we don't have another name for this type of entity. In Greek mythology, chaos with a capital C is personified, and we have a list of descendants, but we don't have that in Norse mythology. We also have no concept of any kind of gender, be it feminine, masculine, or neutral, similar to the situation of Ymir when we're talking about this hurricane. We may never have the answers to any of this. Victor Rydberg seemingly only references this power by that name, hurricane. And it is one of his points that I think holds water, pun intended. It is a fierce power that can rival even the primordials. That's why they are separated on my board. With no other categorization for that level of chaotic energy or life, the addition of a line under hurricane has the potential to fill in a lot of gaps and gray areas that we find within the mythos. Now, you can view that word hurricane that Rydberg uses just as another way to explain chaos. But I would like to add that Rydberg's hurricane is going to have all the elements that a Midgardian hurricane displays. Add to that lightning born of fire or fire born of lightning. We're talking blazing hot. So we're getting a lot of those physical elements incorporated as well. It is fire that comes from lightning striking something. If you've ever seen a video or perhaps in person when lightning struck a tree, there is a sound it makes that is unforgettable. Not just a crack or bump. It rivals the sound of an explosion. A huge bang with a concussive pre-blow similar to a shotgun firing, leaving your hair standing on end, bones vibrating with current, and ears ringing. When it hits, that tree becomes a raging fire, instantaneously burning rather than the slow build we are used to. That explosive power, that fire is what begets Farbati, according to Rydberg. Now, this theory makes sense if you think about it. A group of beings that do not fit anywhere else in the various genealogies. Well, now they have a place. And by placing them here with their own division, it accounts for chaos within the cosmology as a whole. And it allows us to better explain those wild forces that sometimes rear their heads in the lore. Now, Farbati is, as many of you might know, the father of Loki. Marvel gets it wrong this time by naming Laufey as Loki's father. The name Laufey is feminine, and thus Loki's mother. But Farbati isn't an ice giant. So Stan Lee and Marvel had to take some liberties and change it. Farbati, and subsequently Loki, originate from this more destructive elemental line that has strong connections to wildfire and other out-of-control forces of nature. And this brings us to another point that fits well under this division of beings. Remember that hurricanes are changeable, and it explains a lot of Loki's personality and abilities. Separating this group out, per Rydberg's theory, also allows other characters in the mythos to fall nicely into this elemental genealogical line, as well without diminishing or changing their characteristics. But back to Farbati and his line. He meets and hooks up with Laufey. I don't know that he married her in the modern day sense, but we're going to say that they got together. It should probably be stated here and become a staple of interpretation within the subject matter that marriage mentioned within the source material is probably not what we think of as marriage in the modern century. It was just a term easily identified from a Christian context when Snorri wrote the tales. Do not get hung up on relationship definitions in Norse cosmology. They're all over the place, just like any other mythos. Just go with it. Laufey is a Jotun, but we don't know much about her genealogy as far as who her parents might be. Her name roughly translates to crown of trees, or something along those lines. We're talking about the tree tops, the canopy. Imagine if you were to rise above a forest on a drone and see just the treetops expanding around you. Or, better yet, that scene in the Hobbit movie where Bilbo climbs to the top of the trees to determine where his party was located in Mirkwood. His head crests the canopy and he feels that fresh breeze against his cheeks, clearing the oppressive energies that the shadowy undergrowth below had instilled during their travels. Standing there, breathing in and seeing the beauty in the reds and oranges around him, that's the type of imagery that Laufey's name references. To me, it would then lump her as more of an earthy, grounded, Jotnar type of chaotic, a child of the primordial Ymir. These two beings of diverse energies, Farbauti and Laufey, hooked up and we know definitely had Loki. They are listed as his parents, so that part is not in doubt. However, in the myths, we are told that Loki also has two brothers, Helblindi and Bylister. I'm certain I'm mispronouncing these names. Oh well. We know these brothers are sons of Farbati, but we do not know whether the brothers are Laufey's sons. So they could be Loki's half or full brothers. And no mention of either brother's progeny is made, but we then start to dive into the fact that Loki has quite a few children by different women and others. And we should probably bring up Loki's shape-shifting abilities again. Descending from such a chaotic line on his father's side, Jotun energies on his mother's side, and the connection to Ymir's primordial energies, we have a great recipe for the type of shape-shifting and gender-swapping powers Loki possesses. These powers are clearly evident in the creation of his progeny. All of his children are going to inherit some version of that shape-shifting ability from their father due to its elemental and primal nature. Now, whether they use it or not is a whole different thing. The cosmology of pre-Christian Scandinavia is not linear. Therefore, we cannot take for granted that events took place in chronological order as they are listed in the source material. That's why I cannot for certain state the order of birth for Loki's children or the relationships that begat them. We don't know which was his firstborn or lastborn. He could have been in multiple relationships at the same time. No judgment. Let's begin with one of the more famous connections Loki has with a Jotun witch woman named Angrboda. And on a quick side note, there is an excellent fiction book written by authoress Genevieve Kornicek about their romance, if you ever get a chance to read it. It's called The Witch's Heart. I highly recommend it. The source material states Loki enters into a relationship with Angrboda, and they have three monstrous, in quotations, children, Jormungandr, Fenrir, and Hela. And these three are the most well-known and controversial of Loki's children. This is also where we start to dive into the area of making some characters more other than the rest. And while a witch and a Jotun, this doesn't necessarily mean that their mother Angrboda gave birth to other species, which is what many people would have you believe, even with Loki's genetics in the mix. I blame Snorri here as well. It is something more for literary advantages and religious preferences versus an actual truth. I mean, we know that with Angrboda's background, she's a very powerful woman. Powerful women are downplayed in Snorri's retellings and character assassinated by Saxo. While Loki has that chaotic lineage and Angrboda that primordial power, I don't believe that translates absolutely to jumping on the bandwagon conclusion her children were animals when she birthed them. I think it is far more likely that they were shapeshifters from the beginning, and over time relegated to subhuman status to give storytellers like Snorri the groundwork he needed to build his villains. There is not a lot told about Angrboda in the lore. However, we can probably presume that she and Loki hooked up or connected or were in long-term relationship for quite some time in order to have 3 children, which means there had to have been some kind of connection, some kind of feeling there, even if it's in a broader sense of one. Those feelings do not birth monsters. In recounting the named offspring of Loki, I believe that Hela is his only daughter. Hela becomes the keeper of the underworld and acquires dominion over the dead in all realms. Not too shabby of a gig. Her countenance is described as part beautiful woman or maiden and part rotting corpse. No mention of whether it's the top half and bottom half or left side and right side scenario. And most people may find that creepy, but she is the physical embodiment of how life cannot exist without death, and death cannot exist without life. Who better to watch over the souls of the dead than someone who understands both concepts? She epitomizes this with her very essence, her very being. Is she a shapeshifter like her father, though? I think, like all of Loki's children, she probably does have the ability to change her shape along either way, to either be fully beautiful woman or fully rotting corpse. But she chooses to maintain the balance of both states at all times. In and of itself, this should be evidence of her abilities. She would have to possess power of some sort to prevent either of her 2 sides from becoming dominant. Just, think about it. Up next, we have Jormungandr, otherwise known as the Midgard Serpent or the World Encircler. Jormungandr was eventually placed into the waters that surround Midgard by Odin, where they grew and grew until they could bite their own tail, similar to the Erebus imagery. But I don't think they were always a serpent. Jormungandr seems to like maintaining the form of a serpent, so perhaps when it was time for him to go down to the waters, he chose that form because it was easy, it was lovely, it was peaceful. And that resonates with me hard as an introvert. I mean, if I got the whole ocean where I could just lay and sleep all day, be content in my surroundings without the incessant clamorings of society, I would stay a serpent too. Jormungand doesn't do anything to anyone, and yet they are painted as some evil creature. They keep to themselves until that big bully, Thor, shows up, drags them from a really awesome nap, and smacks them on the head with a hammer for no apparent reason except spite. Who does that? I would be irritated if someone did that to me too, so I can't blame them for wanting to knock the crap out of Thor at Ragnarok. Don't mess with someone's naps. It always ends badly. And maybe there are other stories that would explain why there was this rivalry, why there was this need for Thor to go bash an innocent creature on the head. Maybe that creature wasn't so innocent, but without those stories, all we have is what is written. And as much as we read between the lines, some things are pretty set. And that means that Jormungand didn't do anything. He was just an innocent dude taking a nap. Fenrir, as the 3rd child of Loki's pairing with Angrboda, is a wolf in his shapeshifter form. While the lore does not specifically state it, I think he also has a humanoid form. A big reason for my belief is the connection of Fenrir to another witch woman from the Ironwoods, who should not be confused with Angrboda. She isn't named, specifically just the Witch of the Ironwoods, but it doesn't make much sense in comparison, because if Fenrir hooks up with her, that means he would be hooking up with his mom if the Witch of the Ironwoods and Angrboda were the same person. So we don't have too many episodes within Norse mythology of incest. Let's keep that out of here. So the Witch from the Ironwoods and Fenrir have a lot of children, and those children eventually become the wolves of the Ironwoods. And I have a whole theory about that situation, but we'll go over that when we go over one of the other elemental groups. Fenrir finds himself in Asgard, where he's allowed to live, run, and play with the peoples and children of Asgard. However, as he grows, his chaotic energy becomes more fierce in both his personality and his build, and that leads him to be placed in the care of Tyr, which I kind of view this as a fostering type of relationship, with Tyr being his foster father. No one wanted to deal with Fenrir anymore, and so it fell to Tyr to really school him and aid him, feed him, make sure everything was okay. I kind of view Fenrir as the older he grew, the more he would just kind of switch back and forth, not sure what exactly he wanted to do. He was mercurial as he figured out his own boundaries. But once he reached his full adulthood, his wildness couldn't be curbed anymore, and the Aesir and Asyniur plotted to bind him permanently. Shenanigans ensued, and Fenrir was tricked into becoming a prisoner, permanently transformed into a wolf, while Tyr was forced to become an oathbreaker and betrayer. These actions kicked off several journeys that eventually lead the entire pantheon into Ragnarok. Kind of shitty if you ask me. Loki's other progeny are not feared, despised, or denigrated in the same ways as those three. There is a story where Loki must save the Asgardians from a bad deal by changing both his species and gender. In the form of a mare, he lures away and hooks up with Spaulifari, a magic stallion belonging to a large, unnamed Jotun in disguise as a stonemason. Loki shifts into a mare, entices the randy stallion away, and we'll say 9 months later, strolls back up with an 8-legged colt named Sleipnir. Loki gifts Sleipnir to Odin for a steed. And that's really the only story we have for Sleipnir. But that doesn't make any sense. Why would Loki take one of his kids and say, "Here, Odin, use him as an animal"? That doesn't make any sense. If we follow the formula on Loki's other children, it stands to reason that this one also had a humanoid form. The sources do not often reference Odin actually riding him very often, maybe when he goes to war, but even when he's wandering, he's walking. He's not riding anything. So perhaps Sleipnir only shifts his shape when his role as a steed is needed. Otherwise, taking care of an 8-legged animal every single day and night would be severely stress-inducing. But why 8 legs? We aren't sure. But perhaps it has to do with Loki's gender bending and species bending all at the same time. That's a lot of power going. And with whatever Svaldafari had mixed in, perhaps this pairing caused an interesting side effect. I like to think that Sleipnir is probably more of an asexual, gender-neutral type of humanoid when he's not in his horse form. Lastly, the other woman specified by Snorri that Loki hooks up with, although she is referred to as his wife, would be Sigyn. She is listed amongst the Asyniur, but we know very little about her, and the only story that we have is the tragedy that occurs with her sons. They end up having 2 boys, Narvi and Vali, who are humanoid in form until the very end. Their fates are quite sad, and unfortunately, this is the only thing that's ever really mentioned about them. We have one child that is slaughtered, and he's slaughtered when his brother is transformed into a wolf, and he rips out his guts. Do the Aesir, including Odin, have the power to force a being to transform into something against their nature? I don't think so. I think that is a huge stretch. Can they force a transformation if those people or characters already have that capability? I do think they have the ability to do that. So if you differentiate those 2 things, that would mean Narvi and Vali both have the opportunity and the ability to shapeshift into something else, a wolf being one of them. Now, as far as the grandchildren of Loki, there's very little stated. We don't know that Sleipnir had any children. Hela is of the underworld, and there's no mention of any children for her. Jormungandr is doing their own thing, so nothing mentioned about offspring. Narvi and Vali were while they were children. They die young, which ends their lines before they can ever do anything about it. So the only child of Loki that is mentioned with descendants is Fenrir. And it's just briefly stated that the wolves of the Ironwood are descended from him. We have no names. So that kind of takes care of Loki's line for now. It just sort of ends. Now, just to touch base, we are still in the chaos division of the elementals. We haven't moved on to anything else yet. Now, this next part is absolutely my opinion, and it's not backed up by any lore, but I do feel that this other section underneath the primal, elemental, destructive power of the hurricane line would make sense, and that is the household of Utgard Loki. Now, he should not be confused with Loki Laufeyson. They are not the same, and their names are not interchangeable. They are two different entities. In the one story we have on Utgard Loki, his powers are extensive and borderline chaotic. He is older, and I don't necessarily mean he's an old man. I just mean he's been around a long time. He's more cunning and he's crafty. His magic is old as well. It's the kind of magic that none of the Asgardians have seen before, not even Loki himself. And in my opinion, Utgard Loki descends from this particular line of the elementals. His entire household would be more of that destructive force, that primal, feral, nearly out of control source. So look at the people in Utgard Loki's hall. The way that they're described is primal and base. They are huge, almost grotesque in their appearance, dismissive of Thor's party. For them, he's just this little tiny nothing. Powerful entities surrounding Thor and Loki, just exuding wild, raw energy. And there is no classification for Utgard Loki aside from his being from the east. The power he demonstrates is immense, and it frightens his visitors. We have to end his genealogical line with only his name, though. Aside from the generic household, we don't know of any children for Utgard Loki. He may have had them. Heck, some of the minor characters within the myths may be his. But the connections have not been preserved in our current sources, so we cannot make the links for these purposes. It is in this additional instance I think Rydberg's theory was onto something. The types of powers, such as Utgard Loki and Thorbati, can only come from a line filled with chaos. Chaos like a hurricane. Well, this seems like a good place to call a halt to our discussion. We still have one more group of elementals as well as the lines of Ymir to discuss, but in the interest of time, let's do that with the next podcast. My lovely little heathens and heathen friendlies, have a wonderful week as we count down the days to winter solstice celebrations and the new year. Remember your connection to the divine, and with all that chaos going on in the world, don't forget to find your sacred breath and cut.